This is Jesse Campbell here, the Sports Information Director, and we're on a Zoom call with the Cornerstone cross-country coach, Josh Neideck. Josh, how you doing?
Good. Yourself?
Doing pretty good. For those of you who don't know, we have Josh on a call. We just wanted to do an interview with him after there was a pretty cool documentary released on his running days, specifically his time at Indiana Wesleyan in the 2018 Outdoor Championships, where Josh will obviously get into this, but his 4x8 team won the national championship. And Josh, that day, and those couple of days actually, was anything but ordinary for you guys and how that happened. So just kind of to start here, for those that haven't seen the documentary, kind of just share quickly just what happened in those few days and give a little bit of a summary.
Yeah. So, I mean, this was the day of the prelim. There's a lot that packs into this story. The documentary was awesome and it covered a good chunk of it. But, you know, we were sitting in our hotel room in Gulf Shores, Alabama. It's obviously really, really hot there around this time. And so we just kind of relaxed all day in the condo. And I knew my family was coming down. It was my parents, my wife, and my brother. And they were, last time I talked to them, a couple hours out. So we were about to get ready to go to the track. We tried to leave about an hour and a half before our race started. So we'd get there with an hour and 15 minutes to get our warm up in, and kind of takes the pressure off, and you don't have to think too much about it. You just kind of relax, and then, time to go. Time to race. So right before we were about to leave, I hadn't checked my phone for a while. And I went to check my phone, and I had a number of missed calls, texts from various people, my wife, my mother-in-law, numbers that I didn't know. And I'd found out that my family had been in a car accident, a very traumatic car accident. They had flipped the car. They were going about 75 miles per hour, flipped the car 5 times in the median on the highway. And there were a number of different situations that came out of that, with my wife and my brother going to one hospital, and my parents both being airlifted to what I found out was separate hospitals later on. And yeah, it wrecked my world. Getting that call, it was life-changing. I've never had a moment like that where the initial thought was, I called my mother-in-law, and I thought they had all died. In the moment, I'd forgotten that my wife had actually called me on her phone, but I didn't get a voicemail from her or anything. So I figured, maybe this was somebody else who found my wife's phone. And yeah, it was terrifying.
I mean, obviously just a crazy and incredible story. And just with everything going on, obviously not something that you were expecting to be doing. You expected to be running in that prelim. And for just even those that don't know track and field that well, you mentioned just an alternate, and how when you go to nationals you bring an alternate for most of the time, just in case of an injury, not feeling well, that type of a situation. And I've gone through the documentary and I watched it. And what's so cool is you have the opportunity to hear just from everybody's perspective as to getting that call. And one thing that I thought was super awesome, and I just wanted to hear a little more of your perspective on it, is when you got that call, there was a quote you made as you were walking out the door that said, I'll race with you guys tomorrow. You told your alternate, you threw a shirt at him, and you said, I'll race with you guys tomorrow. How much confidence did you just have in your teammates to get through that without you being there? You were the anchor. You're a huge piece to that. And what allowed you to kind of stay so poised when it came to them and encouraging them to race while you had all that other stuff going on?
It's funny that you use the word poise, because my coach, John Foss at Indiana Wesleyan, that's his coaching motto. He engraved poise into us for years, and which is something that I'm excited to take over to Cornerstone, because with those teachings of poise that he would give us, it just prepares you for any situation. And it gave you a confidence that no matter what, and we experienced all sorts of stuff in my 4 years where, we had a couple great cross-country seasons where we were really successful, a couple bad cross-country seasons where we didn't make nationals or we didn't do well at nationals. And so yeah, having that come up, I wouldn't say that, we were for the most part all seniors. Chad was a junior, but so, leadership wasn't really, we were all the leaders on our team. So collectively as a unit, I don't necessarily say I saw myself as a leader of that team, but what I did know is my job from that point forward was just to instill confidence, because I knew I wasn't running. And, I had the most experience in the 800 at the national level on the team. So, the last moments are, this is all I can do. This is what I have to give. And I want to say I was really confident. In the back of my mind, it was probably, I don't want to say wishful thinking, but it was close. I just kind of a hope that, saying that would give them the ability to go out and run, and give me the ability to hope that they can do well. And in the best case scenario, I could get it in for finals the next day, which again, I had, even in a scenario where they were qualifying, I didn't think that me running the next day would necessarily happen, because I figured, my job is now to be with my family.
Yeah. So you mentioned just your relationship with your coach, and talk about just when you were going around to the hospitals. It sounded like from the documentary you had a coach, your coach with you for a while.
Yeah. Yep.
Just kind of talk about like what he meant to you just kind of in that time when you got that call, how you thought that relationship went, and what that really meant for him to step away from all the other stuff going on for track and field to be with you.
Yeah. So I was with two coaches. One was Coach Kolb, who actually was a Grant County Sheriff's deputy. And the interesting part about that was he was able to get through his cop inner circle instant information on where, he kind of just title dropped, and we were able to find out where my family was on the road, where they were going. And he wasn't in my training group. He's our sprints and jumps coach. So he came with one of our assistant coaches, Nino Bellinati, who is still assistant coaching over at Indiana Wesleyan now, and was actually one of my teammates in college. So, to share that moment with Nino was pretty special. We had gone through a lot together as teammates, but to have him there as a support, and it's nationals. Like you want to be there watching and competing. And we had a 10K guy who was going to be competing later that night. So for him to kind of give that up and be with me there was incredible. And I remember the moment that we shared together, watching from an Uber, because that's when we found out that my mom and dad were both okay. I told Cole, hey, you can go back. Nino was willing to stay with me. And so we're Ubering back and forth, and I'll never forget, we got in the Uber of this old lady, and man, she was quite the driver. I remember kind of being scared a little bit. She was hitting the brakes really hard, but we were watching the prelim as it happened. And when Noah crossed the line, I was verbally, yelling in the car at this little screen watching the race. And when Noah crossed the line, we knew we had to get top two. When that happened, Nino and I'll never forget just the high five, and held each other's hand, and it was actually a pretty intense emotional moment. Just knowing, like, because we knew at that point my family was relatively stable. And potentially there was a chance that tomorrow we were able, I'm able to run tomorrow, but, for the most part, that the guys are able to go, and having the confidence that God could do something special. Getting them to finals was already God working. And so what would, why sell God short in what he could do? So yeah, it wasn't necessarily a moment where I knew I was going to be running tomorrow, but it was a moment of these guys made it to finals, and now, in Gulf Shores, Alabama, running back-to-back days with that heat, anything can happen. And a lot of the times, the national championship time is run in prelims, because it's really hard to come back the next day and run faster. So yeah, that was a really cool moment that I really will never forget. And I'm sure Nino and Coach Kolb would say the same thing.
So let's talk a little bit about just going into that finals race then. So like you said, you obviously without you there, you guys qualified, just snuck over and got that second place to get to the finals. And let's talk about just kind of the moment going back to your teammates. And another huge part I thought personally, just that I thought was so cool from your teammates in that video, is you coming back, and you obviously that entire year had been the anchor, the last person to run in that 4x8, and they gave you the option of where you wanted to run in that race, or if you even wanted to run in that finals race, and gave you the choice, and were willing to kind of adjust their plans and what they're used to adapt to something you're going through. So just kind of share a little bit about what that meant to have them do that, and why you chose to stay the anchor in that situation.
Yeah, those guys, man, I mean, it's easy for me to get selfless at that point, where it's like, this has happened to me and my family, but I mean, like we said in the video, those guys are my brothers, and they walked through that with me, and I would walk through that with them if that ever happened, or something of that nature happened. So it was really like a family making a decision. And I would almost say it was almost too selfless of them to say, hey, Josh, we're going to adjust to you, because the day before, I got 2 hours of sleep the night before. My brother and my wife actually got discharged from the hospital, and so I was able to spend the night with them in a I would rearrange the rooms, and so we had a room with 2 beds in it. My brother got one, and then I was able to sleep with my wife in the other bed that night, which was crazy. And it was kind of the point of, I have this picture of that car accident, and I hadn't seen it happen, right? I didn't experience that, but just the terror of that replaying in my mind over and over at night. And it became a choice where it's like, man, I can either lay here, try to sleep and have these nightmares, or I can hold my wife, whose life God spared. And so that was kind of a personal choice. I think I slept from like 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. that next day. Got up, and Coach Snyder cooked us breakfast. But the other part of that is, between running back and forth to the hospitals, I went about 12 hours without eating or drinking anything. So to say I was prepared, in body, mind, and spirit, I was exhausted, emotionally, spiritually, I was really tired. Physically, I had no sleep. I didn't eat. So, there's a part of me that was really considering, do I want to run? Because I don't know what I can do. My dad had told me the night before. I had asked him, I said, hey, Dad, do you want me to stay here with you in your hospital bed tonight? Because my mom had her cousin. And he said, no, you need to go back, and you need to prepare for your team. And I'll never forget him saying, I'm going to be there tomorrow to watch you run. And man, I mean, that was completely wishful thinking. His head was still bleeding hours and hours after I watched him, stand up. He was able to walk, but I watched him stand up and go to the bathroom. And it was, I was educated as a nurse. There was no way he was getting out of that hospital that night. But I remember telling him, okay, if that gives my dad hope in recovery, absolutely, like, I'll do that. So the deciding factor for me was probably just hope that my dad would be there, which was probably misplaced. In the back of my mind, I knew he probably wasn't going to be, but I wanted to run that last race, and I put it in God's hands. Our whole team put it in God's hands. So what can we do as a team? We're able to just say, God, this is for you. You do with us what you need to do. The expectations were none. We were seated last going into that final. So, or 8th out of 8 teams, I guess, not last, but in that heat we were. So really, they say, hey, Josh, where do you want to run? I don't, what do you say? I think, and I say, with all this lack of preparation for this race, I'm going to run last. I told them that's what I'm comfortable with. Another funny part of that is, up in that final for that season was the first time that we had our best team running together. And, we only run the 4x8 maybe once or twice in the regular season, really just to qualify. And so we qualified without running our best guys. And then prelims, I was out. So this was our first time where we were all collectively running together, which was exciting because we had this big goal. But at the same time, with the circumstances, I wasn't expecting anything crazy. I think Noah was actually the only one who admitted going into that race that he wanted to win it. The other ones of us were like, man, if we can just survive this, that would be great. So I told them I'll run last because I want, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking I want you all to have a competitive race where we're in it, and then I get the stick, and then, I get us out of it, rather than, me running second to take some pressure off and running poorly to the point where, okay, now we're behind and it just looks different. But, in turn, God had a different plan for that. That was definitely God's voice and his plan coming out, because he knew what he could do in that moment.
Right. Well, and let's jump right into that race then. I know kind of brought in just kind of your thoughts of why you ran last. And again, something funny you kind of joked with in the documentary is really even being seated last. When you got that baton, you were not expecting to be in the position that you were in. And you kind of thought like, well, if I run last, at least they all get the opportunity to run their best race, and then whatever happens, happens. And let's talk about just kind of your experience from when you were handed the baton to the end of the race. Let's start by you answering the question of what place were you in when you were handed the baton?
Yeah, we were in first. And so that was an awakening moment. And really, I mean, I talk in the documentary of looking up. I spent the first like 2 legs walking up and down the track, trying to stay loose, but looking up into the stands, because like I said, in the back of my mind, I'm hoping that, what my dad told me, I'm hoping that he can get there, but he wasn't there. And I saw all my teammates, and, those 2 legs fly by, and all of a sudden Mike gets the stick and he's in second, runs just a crazy race. I mean, man, he destroyed it. Easily the best race of his life by a landslide. He went out and just crushed it. And, it was so impressive. In the video, you hear one of Noah's mom just saying, whoa, Mike, oh my word. And cause he's just flying, he just crushed it. So when he makes that pass, that was the moment where I'm kind of like, crud, I got to run now. So that really, it was the first time that day that I thought about the race. Throughout the whole day, we had a lot of time to, again, sit around at the condo, lots of emotion, calls, checking in on my family, my parents, crying, just scared and overwhelmed by what God had been doing. So, it had maybe 40 seconds where I focused in and just said, all right, so, I wasn't thinking about how I'm going to run this. I'm just thinking, I'm looking at the 2 guys who are behind me. One of them is just crazy fast. And in the prelim the day before, this kid, he ran for Friends. He and his twin brother, phenomenal athletes. He had brought his team back and won that race. And he was, seconds behind, maybe, 5 to 8 seconds behind, which is crazy. He went like sub 150, I think. So, I didn't think that we were far enough ahead to beat him. And then the other kid that I was running against, we raced each other at indoor nationals. So, and he had bested me. So really, I'm thinking third. I knew I could comfortably get third. I could run a bad race and probably get third. So, but then you get the baton and your race instincts just kick in. And so the adrenaline's going nuts. And, I got the baton and got around that first turn. And I remember thinking to myself, Coach Foss and I had talked about how to run this race, really compared it to the past national championship team for our school, which was back in like 2008, they won. And I remember Coach's son anchored that race, and we had talked for a couple of years on how to run. And, it's easier if the situation presents itself, don't run in first, because if you're in second, you're in control. And wait and be patient. A lot of people think, with a half a lap to go, 200 meters, that's when you go. But, your body physically can't hold that unless you've sacrificed, the previous race. But if you're running competitively the whole time, you just have to wait and wait and wait and wait. So I just, I knew we were close on the handoff. And so I just prayed. I said, Lord, like in the race, just let him take it, let him take it. And, sure enough, he took it and closed the door on me. So that was God's provision number one there, right? And I guess within the race, he had 1,000 provisions before that. But so then, it gets to the point where, okay, now I just got to stay on this guy's hip. And his name was Thomas. He ran a heck of a race. And I remember there were like 3 separate times where he put a surge on, and it took everything I had just to answer that. At about 200 into the race, I was dead, exhausted, and that adrenaline wears off, and it's just like, oh my word, the rest of the night pours down on you, and I felt like I had nothing until 250 meters in, and out of nowhere, I hear my dad yelling for me, and oh man, chills. I mean, just came over my body. Turns out Renee's husband, David, was able to get my dad discharged. I don't know how, because to this day, I still don't think he was ready. And my dad showed up at the race 2 minutes before it started. They drove him all the way up to the fence. He didn't pay. He just walked up to the fence. And, I think back to, there's a Christian movie, a football movie. I don't even remember the title, but Facing the Giants. A similar situation to that, where the dad stands up for his kid. And that's kind of corny, right? It's kind of a corny movie, but powerful at the same time. And that's how I felt my dad was in that situation. And to hear his voice, in one of the videos, there are a few different versions of the race. I just remember just fist pumping like this, because at that point I was like, I was pretty confident, and I thought, man, this is it. We got it. And then, a few meters later, that adrenaline like wears off, and now it's back to being tired. So we're going into, 450 meters left, 1 lap left. I remember he put on one more surge, and really, I told myself, if I cover this, that's it. And at this, who are we running for, right? At this point, my dad's here, like, let's do something crazy. And 400 to go. It's okay. One more race, as Tebow says, for the rest of your life. And that's completely it. And I totally felt that. So, or one more lap for the rest of your life. And so we get 1 lap to go, and, one more lap, and got down to 300 to go. I heard Coach Snyder going crazy. If you listen to the documentary, there's, the voiceover of my coach talking about the race. And the crazy part about that is we didn't talk before the race, Coach and I. Normally we would talk about, what do we want to do, walk through the situations. There wasn't time for that. And the beautiful part of it is, the only time that I talked to really anybody before that race was to my teammates when we had our prayer. And the prayer, like we said in the documentary, was, God, just let us go worship. That's all we had time for. There was no time or place for anything else but to use our gifts to worship on the track. And it wasn't about strength. It wasn't about performance. It wasn't about place. Normally we'd say, let us honor you with the gifts you've given us. It was just, let us worship you, because you have been so faithful up to this point. And so that's what it was. 300 to go, 200 to go, and I was ready. But in the back of my mind, I'm saying, be patient, be patient. My coach said, throughout that whole race, just right in his pocket, be ready. It's going to go, be ready. To the point where, I got 100, 140. My coach says 80 meters more, and we're going to fly, which again, we were on the same page, which is what, that's kind of like all we had to do. Was just, we knew I say it's the epitome of being a senior. You go out and you know what to do, to the point where coach says now, and I didn't hear him. He's kind of talking, yelling to himself, and it was like at the same exact time, is when I knew I was ready, make the move, and you don't look back. I thought I was much farther ahead than I was. When I watched the video, I was like, holy smokes, they were way closer than I thought they were. But I'll never forget running down that finish line. And in the video, you can also hear my brother screaming. That really gets me. My brother held a lot of weight. He was driving the vehicle, and my wife talks about seeing him in the car, looking at his parents. My wife was really the only one who was able to see everything, but my dad, his head was on my brother's lap in the car, passed out. And so what my brother went through is traumatic, so traumatic. And to hear him screaming, that gets me every time. But then 50 meters left, I see my teammates, and they're all excited, and I felt good. I started crying about 30 meters left. I was like whining. It was like the most little pathetic little noise you've ever heard, because you can't produce tears. It's all coming out my body and sweat. And finished the race. Craziest moment, just unbelievable. God literally just pulling us through. So incredible time. Went over and embraced my teammates. We prayed, and then like I said, I ran over to see my dad, and that moment it just kept getting better and better and better. Like, winning is incredible, but then you just forget about winning when I can go embrace because it was like, you were here to see my last race, win or lose. Like if we were in dead last and I heard him, the same emotions come up because he was there. And just unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, that's so awesome. And again, just thank you so much for sharing that experience again. Obviously, I'll ask a couple more questions here in a second, but just again to plug the documentary, it, like you said, it does give a pretty incredible view. And just at the end of how you get the different perspectives from the coach's angle, you hear your dad scream in the background, and you aren't kidding. You're rounding that corner, and you can see a little bit of the emotion coming in your face as you connect to the fact that your dad's there. Talked about that little fist bump. I definitely saw a little bit of that fist bump as you were trying to round that corner, and just what you went through obviously was incredible. And just the feat that team had to just do that, not only with everything going on, but to be seated 8 of all these things, to be seated last. Like, there was no expectation going in, even without all that adrenaline and all that extra stuff that went on. So just as we get close to wrapping up here, just thinking back on this, as we've talked about all this, how would you describe just kind of how this situation and this circumstance really shaped your relationship with Christ as you chose to now obviously become a coach?
Yeah, I mean, at that point in time, I was planning on being a nurse. I didn't really necessarily think about coaching until, this October, which was a year and a half later. But man, it brings to light what matters. And the running world, the sport of running, it's hard, right? It's taxing. It's pushing your body to the utmost limit every time you go out there. And it really changed my perspective on what matters. Now I had a moment back at indoor nationals that year where, I had a bit of a panic attack going into one of my races, because I put so much pressure on myself all the time for a number of different reasons. I had a horrible fear of failure. And there was a moment where I just had to spend 15 minutes with God. And the first moment in my life where I really felt like I felt his physical, like he wrapped me up in his arms just to calm me down. And from that point forward, it really showed me what mattered. I was getting nervous because I was afraid of looking poorly. And so without that experience in the winter, this doesn't go that way. And I look back on it, and God was preparing me for what he knew was coming. But between me and God, he spared my family's life. The car, when they went back, my cousin Renee went back to pick up my family's stuff at the junkyard the next day, and the car was placed into a category of a bunch of other, 4 other vehicles as the worst in the yard. And in those other 4 vehicles, nobody survived. And in my parents' vehicle, 4 people survived, 4 out of 4. So, to say the least, that was the most directly impactful experience I've ever had with Christ. But then, I talked about it putting into perspective what matters, especially now that I'm coaching at Cornerstone, and my vision and my perspective as a coach. I want my athletes to be able to to go out and run with that type of freedom of, God, today I recognize, and every day I recognize that you gave me this gift of running. To be a collegiate athlete is a privilege, right? It means that God has given you a unique ability that you're able to take to, the highest level before going pro. And that, there's no point in putting pressure on yourself and in going into a race scared. You should be on that line excited to display the gifts that God has given you, because you're going through this whole betterment process of practice every day, and nutrition and sleep, hydration, lifting, stretching. Like, none of that is worth it if you're going to get to the line and not be excited and be scared and then run in that same manner. And that's what I struggled with for 10 years. It took me until like my second to last season to figure it out. So, my goal for my athletes is to be able to get on the line excited, with all pressure off. And then no matter how the race goes, to come up to me at the end. And when we have that conversation about the race, to say, first of all, did you worship on the track? Did you worship on the course? Were you out there solely for the purpose of using your gifts to bring God the utmost amount of glory? And the only way you can do that is by running your best. Sometimes your best goes to a national championship. That day, my best effort, my teammates' best effort equated to a national championship. Sometimes it doesn't equate to that. And all you have is a subpar effort, or a subpar time with a maximum effort. So, I want my athletes to be able to have that conversation with me, to know that I'm not going to come down on them. If they can look at me after a bad race and say, Coach, that was the best I had for today, praise God. Yeah. If it goes well and they can say, Coach, that was the best I had today, praise God. That's his call to us. And especially in the running community, it can be really easy to have an obsession with the sport. Running's unique in that way. It's for whatever reason, the community is just so, I love the running community, but it's easy to become obsessed and put running first. I think just because of the effort it takes to be successful. And you have to do, everything you do pours into running success. Doing the little things correctly, reorganizes your life to where, running a lot of the times is at the forefront of your mind. And, this experience showed me running is awesome. It's freeing. It's a gift from God, but it does not matter in the scope of reality and eternity. And at that moment, we realized God doesn't care who wins and loses. He cares about situations bringing him the most glory. And Chad said in that documentary, we don't think that anybody else winning that day would bring God as much glory as it was for us. So knowing that, I tell my athletes, God doesn't want you to win. Going on this line, it's not your responsibility to win today, but it's your responsibility to do your best and see how he uses that to bring him glory. And that type of freedom changes the whole scope of running. And so that's been my mission as an assistant coach the past 2 years. I've loved that role, and I'm so excited to be able to bring that to Cornerstone, and help kids get to this realization that it took me far too long to get to myself, as someone who's been a believer my whole life. It's almost embarrassing. So yeah, that's my mission, and that's what I hope to bring to this university, not even necessarily in running, but in the athletic department, in the student body, and the community outreach. I hope that my athletes can emulate that type of running freedom, because it's fun, and it is an experience unlike anything else.
Well, just awesome perspective. We're obviously so grateful to have you at Cornerstone, and just to see what you're going to do with our athletes. I was going to ask you this last question, but I really think you answered it. And I'll just plug again the documentary. The documentary is called Giving It All. And obviously, just in everything you just described in that last question about your coaching perspective, I think that resembles well who you are and what your perspective is regardless of the result, just giving your all to what you're doing and to God. And again, for those who have not taken the time to see the original documentary, but will watch this, obviously, we hope you go back and look at the original documentary as well. It almost is inspired a little bit by the Michael Jordan documentary, just in the setup. And it is a tearjerker for sure. Definitely got me. And Josh, thank you so much for just taking the time to do this. And we just look forward to having you and getting back to sports at Cornerstone and what we're able to do. So thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Jesse. And also shout out to Quick Designs. My buddy Jacob Quick was the one who put the documentary together. He does some great work, but I got to give credit where credit is due there. He set out a good chunk of his time to pull this all together. So very grateful for him.
Awesome. Perfect.